Chapter 1. The Disappearance of Horace Greaves. The letter came wrapped in a cream-coloured envelope, sealed with wax, bearing the crest of the Greaves family. 2 greyhounds chasing a crown. Allan Pinkerton turned it over slowly, sniffed the faint scent of bergamot, and slit it open with his penknife. It was from Elizabeth Greaves, the wife of Chicago industrialist Horace Greaves. Her husband had vanished without a trace, no ransom, no note, no witnesses. It was the sort of case Pinkerton loathed and lived for. By the time the train hissed into Chicago's Union Station the following evening, snow dusted the cobblestones like powdered sugar. Pinkerton stepped out, adjusted his bowler hat, and glanced at the newspaper boy shouting headlines about a bank robbery in Milwaukee. But his interest was elsewhere. Horace Greaves had made a fortune in steel and shipping. He owned half the port contracts on the Great Lakes and was rumoured to have political ambitions. Yet 3 days ago he had left his office at 5 p.m., climbed into his usual private carriage, and vanished somewhere between downtown and his estate in Lincoln Park. The coach never arrived. The driver, a trusted family employee named Merle Hobbs, had vanished with him. Elizabeth Greaves received Pinkerton in the conservatory of their stone mansion, a sprawl of ivy-covered towers and leaded glass windows. She was calm. Too calm, Pinkerton thought, for a woman whose husband had disappeared into the ether. "I don't believe he was taken," she said, pouring tea from a silver set that hadn't seen use in years. "Horace was clever. If he didn't want to be found, he wouldn't be." "And yet you hired me," Pinkerton said, watching her hands. Not shaking, not fidgeting, just precise, elegant movement. "I want confirmation," she replied. "That he's alive, or that he isn't." Pinkerton nodded slowly. "Tell me about Merle Hobbs." "Hobbs has worked for us for 9 years, a quiet man, loyal, ex-military, I believe. He lived in a small apartment above the carriage house, never gave us any trouble." "Any recent changes in his behaviour?" She paused. "Come to think of it, last month I saw him arguing with Horace. I asked, and Horace said it was about union trouble, but Hobbs looked angry." Pinkerton leaned forward. "Union trouble?" Horace had been fighting the stevedores at the port. Pay cuts, longer hours. Hobbs may have sympathized. That was something. Pinkerton excused himself and made for the carriage house. Hobbs's quarters were cramped, but meticulous. A single iron-framed bed, a shelf lined with paperbacks, and a writing desk with a drawer that stuck slightly. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Pinkerton pulled one free. It was addressed to a CD in St. Louis. The content was vague, but passionate. Hobbs was in love, and planning a move. So where had he gone? Back in the city, Pinkerton made a stop at the office of Greaves Shipping and Steel. A polished receptionist offered a wary smile as he entered. "You hear about Mr. Greaves?" "Yes," Pinkerton said. "I'd like to see his office." He was led to a corner suite filled with mahogany shelves and a wall-sized map of the Great Lakes shipping routes. One calendar page had been torn loose, February 4th, the day of the disappearance. But something caught Pinkerton's eye on the floor, a small square of paper tucked just beneath the desk. He pulled it free. It was a train schedule. For the 9:20 p.m. freight departing from the South Shore Depot, marked in red ink, Bay 4, westbound. That wasn't a line Horace Greaves was known to use. It was an industrial route, mostly used by smugglers and scrap runners. Pinkerton folded it into his coat. He'd visit Bay 4 before the sun rose. But as he stepped into the hallway, a man collided with him. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a thick moustache and a port inspector's badge. He apologized gruffly and tried to move on, but Pinkerton held his wrist. "You're Inspector Dunn, aren't you?" he asked. The man froze. "Yes." "You know me?" I know you were dismissed from the docks last year for taking bribes. Curious that you'd be here today." Dunn's eyes narrowed. "I've been reinstated. Temporary duty. Ask the Port Authority. Pinkerton let him go, but watched him hurry away with too much urgency for a man who had nothing to hide." That night, at the South Shore Depot, Bay 4 sat under a canopy of mist and oil smoke. Pinkerton crouched beside the siding, watching, as labourers loaded a sealed crate the size of a coffin onto the last car. He waited, then moved silently to the manifest nailed to the side of the container. It read, "Machine parts. Destination, Des Moines." But the weight listed was over 700 pounds, too heavy for bolts and gears. Pinkerton tapped the crate once, hollow echo. He smiled grimly. Horace Greaves might not be missing much longer. Chapter 2. A Widow's Uneasy Smile. Pinkerton returned to the Greaves estate just past 9 the next morning. The air smelled of soot and spent frost, the kind of Chicago winter that clung to your coat like guilt. He was let in by a silent maid whose eyes barely met his. That, too, was telling. Elizabeth Greaves awaited him in the sunroom this time. A fire crackled in the hearth despite the daylight pouring in. She was dressed in black silk now, an odd choice since there had been no announcement of death. She greeted him with her thin smile and offered no pretense of warmth. "Well, Mr. Pinkerton," she asked, gesturing to a chair. "Do you have news?" He sat across from her, placing his gloves neatly on his lap. "I have information, but not yet answers." She tilted her head with affected curiosity. "Do go on." "There's a freight car bound for Des Moines," he said. "It left last night from Bay 4 at South Shore. A crate was loaded, listed as machine parts. It weighs 700 pounds. Her hand twitched ever so slightly over her teacup. Pinkerton saw it. "And you suspect my husband is inside?" she asked. "I suspect something valuable is, perhaps a man, perhaps a body." She sipped her tea slowly. "Aren't you being dramatic?" "Possibly. But when a man of Mr. Greaves's stature vanishes without so much as a muddy footprint, I must chase every lead." She set the cup down with a soft clink. "My husband had enemies, Mr. Pinkerton, labor unions, smugglers he refused to deal with, politicians who resented his influence. If you're looking for a culprit, you won't have to search far." "Enemies, yes," Pinkerton said, "but those don't usually gain access to a man's private carriage and convince a trusted driver to disappear with him." Her eyes flashed. "Are you suggesting I was involved?" "I'm suggesting you were calm when you shouldn't be, and people often reveal the truth when they're too careful not to." A long silence followed. Then she stood. "I will not be insulted in my own home. If you wish to investigate, do so, but I will not answer further insinuations." She turned, then paused at the doorway. "Horace was a difficult man, Mr. Pinkerton. If he staged this disappearance himself, it would not surprise me in the least." When she left, Pinkerton remained seated, his eyes fixed on a family portrait above the fireplace. Horace stood with a hound at his feet, Elizabeth beside him, eyes already distant even in paint. But there was another figure, a younger man, tall, handsome, and completely unfamiliar. He rang the bell. When the maid returned, he gestured to the painting. "Who is the third man?" The maid hesitated, looking down. "Mr. Lionel, sir, Mrs. Greaves's brother." "Does he live here?" "Not anymore. He left 5 months ago to California, I believe." Pinkerton narrowed his eyes. "Why?" She swallowed. "There was disagreement between him and Mr. Greaves." "What kind of disagreement?" The maid looked toward the hallway, then back at him. I don't know the details, but they argued loudly about money, about the business. After that night, Mr. Lionel packed his bags and never returned." "Did Mrs. Greaves seem upset?" "She didn't speak of it. Of course not." Pinkerton thanked her, rose, and made for the city. His next stop, the central offices of Greaves Shipping and Steel. This time, he wasn't interested in Horace's office. He wanted the accounting floor. 2 clerks tried to intercept him, but a flash of his badge and a cold stare got him access to the ledgers. Within an hour, Pinkerton spotted the first inconsistency. A long series of payments labelled as external transport contracts, each signed off by Horace Greaves, yet dated after his disappearance. He double-checked the signatures, identical, too identical. He brought the entry slips to the senior accountant. These signatures, Pinkerton said, tapping the page, were all written by the same hand, copied from a template. See how the loop in the G never varies? The accountant, a bearded man named Wilkins, frowned. I hadn't noticed. Who delivered these entries? Wilkins hesitated. A clerk named Howard Finch, new hire, transferred from a Detroit office 6 weeks ago. Where is he now? Didn't show up today. First time he's missed a day. Pinkerton stood abruptly. I want his employment file. Now he received it within minutes, a flimsy set of pages that listed an address in Bridgeport and a prior employer in Detroit, but the Detroit firm was one Pinkerton knew well. It had closed 3 years ago. The address? A flophouse known for harbouring con men. He folded the file and walked out. The web was tightening. Someone had been impersonating Horace for days after the supposed disappearance. That meant the act had been planned. Perhaps not by Greaves himself, but certainly by someone with access to his records and his signature. Whether Horace was alive or dead, it was no longer a matter of searching for a missing man. It was a matter of exposing a lie so large it could ruin a city. Chapter 3. Secrets beneath the ledger. The flophouse in Bridgeport stood like a cracked tooth among a row of sagging tenements, its paint peeled in long, skin-like curls. Laundry flapped from broken windows like surrender flags. Pinkerton stood outside the building's rusted gate for only a second before pushing through. Room 6. B reeked of gin and damp cloth. A battered trunk lay open near the bed. Pinkerton stepped in and scanned the cluttered space. No Howard Finch, but someone had left in a hurry. He sifted through the trunk, receipts, tobacco flakes, a faded photograph of a young woman with a St. Louis opera ticket tucked behind it. No identification, but under the thin mattress he found the real prize, a forged ledger with exact replicas of Horace Greaves's signature, dozens of them, each traced in pencil, then inked over. Nearby, a scrap of parchment bore notes in a careful hand. Diversion route, Des Moines, and below it, next payment, 11 February via RJ. Pinkerton pocketed the note and ledger. The forger hadn't just created a handful of entries, this was systematic, which meant someone inside the company was helping, maybe orchestrating it. He returned to the city and made for the headquarters of Greaves Shipping once more, this time avoiding the front office. He bypassed the reception desk and took a back stair to the 3rd floor, the internal audit division. No one stopped him. There he found a clerk named Jonah Wexley, an anxious man with a face like sour milk. "I want to talk about the February ledgers," Pinkerton said without preamble. Wexley blinked. "Sir, I'm not the right person. You need Mr. Harwin. He's over the contract files." "Harwin's on leave. I know you signed off on the entries for external transport." Wexley fidgeted. "I didn't know they were false." "So you did notice?" The man sagged. "A few seemed off, but I was told it came directly from the top, from Horace himself." "Who told you that?" Wexley hesitated. "Mr. Greaves's brother-in-law, Lionel Beckworth. He said Horace was restructuring operations, that it was all temporary, off-book arrangements until the union trouble calmed." "Lionel Beckworth?" Pinkerton repeated. "When was the last time you saw him?" "Late January, a week before Mr. Greaves vanished." So much for Lionel having left for California. Pinkerton's suspicions hardened. He needed to find Lionel, and soon. Back at his rented room on Dearborn Street, Pinkerton spread out his findings. The timeline was falling into place. Forged ledgers, false transport records, Lionel Beckwith's involvement. But to what end? If Horace Greaves was dead, someone was maintaining the illusion he was alive for money. If he was alive, he was hiding with a purpose. That night, Pinkerton paid a visit to the South Side freight yard. The railmaster, a red-nosed Irishman named Doyle, met him by the coal tower. "I heard about that crate you mentioned," Doyle muttered, lighting a stubby pipe. "Seemed strange, all right. Heavy as hell, no inspection papers. Didn't come through usual channels." "Who paid for it?" Doyle checked a leather-bound ledger. "Cash. Guy signed the invoice as R.J., the same initials from the note." "Describe him." "Tall. American, not foreign. Black coat. Wore gloves. Said he was with Greaves Steel, so we didn't press." "Where's the shipment now?" "Des Moines by now, unless it made a stop." Pinkerton nodded grimly. "Give me a list of every delivery made by that train." Back at his room, he combed through the delivery manifest. One entry stood out, a warehouse just outside Iowa City, not the train's listed route. Marked as a special overnight transfer, paid in full, again in cash. A detour. It had to be checked. By the following afternoon, Pinkerton was on horseback, cutting across frozen prairie roads toward Iowa City. He reached the warehouse before dusk. It was quiet. Too quiet. A locked gate, a rusted lock, a place that hadn't seen daily operation in weeks. He broke the lock. Inside, rows of crates sat like silent soldiers. Near the back, one stood apart, marked with the Greaves logo, then crudely scratched out. Pinkerton pried it open. Empty. No machine parts, no body, no answers, just dust. He lit a match and examined the floor. Drag marks, faint boot prints. Someone had been here, and recently. Then he spotted it. A torn scrap of wool coat snagged on a nail, monogrammed in gold thread. H.G. Horace Greaves. Pinkerton's breath clouded in the cold air. Horace had been here, and someone had removed him. Why? Where was he now? And who stood to gain most if the world kept believing he was missing? Or dead? Chapter 4. The Man with Two Names. Two names, two faces, two stories that didn't quite fit together. That's what Allan Pinkerton told himself as the stagecoach rattled back toward Chicago. Horace Greaves hadn't simply disappeared, he had been moved, hidden, or worse. But the detail that gnawed at Pinkerton wasn't just the monogrammed cloth or the empty crate, it was the name scrawled in every false document tied to the cover-up. R.J. Who was R.J.? 3 days later he had his answer. Using his network of informants across rail lines and shipping yards, Pinkerton traced a series of cash transactions all signed by the same man, sometimes R.J. Colby, sometimes Richard James, and once even as R. Jarvis. A man who moved with gloves on, used forged documents, and always paid in cash. But the handwriting, deliberate slants, curved R's, tight spacing, was always identical. A forger, yes, but one with knowledge of high-value logistics and access to the private dealings of Greaves Steel. Pinkerton reviewed the names again. One stood out, R.J. Colby. That name had appeared on a failed business venture Greaves had funded the year prior, a mining operation in Nevada that collapsed in scandal and debt. Colby had disappeared afterward. Rumor claimed he owed Greaves over $20,000. Now he was back. Pinkerton headed for the Chicago City Archives and within hours found the legal documents from the Colby mining collapse. At the bottom of the dissolution papers, he found the original Colby signature. He compared it to the R.J. signature from the shipping invoices. Same hand, same slant. But there was more. A notary seal, half faded, indicated the presence of a co-signer, Lionel Beckwith, the brother-in-law, the man supposedly in California, the man who had told Greaves' employees to stay quiet and accept the ledger forgeries. Pinkerton straightened in his chair. Lionel had been business partners with Colby. They had lost a fortune. Greaves had backed them and, according to press clippings from the time, publicly disowned them after the scandal. Revenge? Or something colder? Like a plan to steal what Greaves refused to give them. Either way, the two men were working together again. And Greaves, willingly or not, had been their pawn. Pinkerton made for a private hotel known for its discretion, the Ainsley House on Walton Street. It was favoured by out-of-town gamblers, forgers and blackmailers. The desk clerk, a gaunt man with slicked back hair, recognised the name Colby immediately. Tall fellow, thick moustache, real polished-like. "That's the one," Pinkerton said. "He was here last week. Checked out 3 days ago. Left in a hired hack, headed south." "Did he leave anything?" The clerk grinned. "Only trouble?" But in the room, Pinkerton found a forgotten clue. A blotter pad under the writing desk held a faint impression from a note. With a soft pencil and gentle strokes, he shaded it until words emerged. "Meet L behind Camden Mills. Midnight. Final transfer. Bring him, unconscious, if necessary." Pinkerton's jaw set. They were moving Horace again. And Lionel would be there. Camden Mills was an abandoned textile plant on the southern fringe of the city, isolated near the river. Ideal for shady dealings. That night, Pinkerton dressed in a long canvas coat and boots, no badge, no papers, just a revolver tucked behind his belt. He arrived early and took up position in the rafters of the crumbling mill, his eyes sharp as the frost gathering on broken panes. Just before midnight, a wagon clattered into the yard below. Two men got out, one unmistakably Lionel Beckworth. The other matched the hotel clerk's description of Colby. They opened the back of the wagon. A man lay inside, bound and blindfolded. Horace Greaves, alive. Pinkerton's hand hovered near his revolver, but he didn't move, not yet. Colby growled. "You sure he didn't see you?" Lionel grunted. "He barely remembers his name. That opiate you gave him worked too well." Colby smirked. "He won't need it much longer. Once we dump him on the rail line in Indiana with fake IDs, they'll think he wandered drunk onto the tracks. His fortune becomes a widow's, and his wife knows exactly how to wire us her thanks." Pinkerton's heart pounded. Elizabeth was in on it. Everything clicked into place. The cold demeanor, the forged ledgers, the false timeline. They weren't waiting to find Horace. They were preparing to inherit. The men hoisted Horace's limp body just as Pinkerton stood and shouted, "Federal agent, don't move!" Colby reached for his coat, too slow. Pinkerton fired, striking the wheel. The blast echoed through the rafters like cannon fire. Both men froze. Beckworth dropped the body and bolted for the back. Pinkerton leapt from the platform, tackled Colby hard into the dirt. "You bastard!" Colby snarled, swinging. Pinkerton dodged and landed a punch to his jaw. Colby collapsed. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had heard the shot. Pinkerton dragged Colby up and muttered, "Don't worry. You'll be seeing Beckworth again." In a cell, Horace stirred, groaning softly. Alive. Drugged, but alive. And now, Pinkerton thought grimly, came the hard part, exposing a murder plot that had almost succeeded without a single bullet fired. Chapter 5. Footsteps in the factory. Night, the wind off the river carried the scent of iron rust and old grease as Allan Pinkerton stepped across the threshold of the abandoned Camden Mills textile factory. The once busy mill was now a skeleton, shattered windows, splintered rafters, and silence that pressed against the ears like cloth stuffing in a casket. Pinkerton's boots crunched over broken glass. He moved cautiously through the main assembly floor, where looms once clattered. Now only shadows moved, his and something else. He ducked behind a stack of collapsed crates and waited. A clock somewhere struck midnight, Moments later, a door groaned open. Pinkerton peered out. Two figures stepped in, one tall and broad-shouldered, the other thinner with a sloping hat and cautious gait. In the low light from a flickering lantern, Pinkerton recognized them both. Lionel Beckworth, nervous, fidgeting, and the man known by many names now confirmed to be R.J. Colby, calm and focused, his movements practiced. "Where's the body?" Colby asked softly. "Alive still," Lionel said, barely above a whisper. "We've kept him dosed, like you said." "Too long," Colby muttered. "He's starting to babble. Called out for his secretary last night. If he starts remembering details, dates, names, we're sunk." "Then we finish it tonight," Colby nodded. "We'll move him to the meat locker in Hobbs's old warehouse. That's the last stop." Pinkerton froze. Merle Hobbs, the missing carriage driver. He hadn't just vanished, he'd been silenced. And his warehouse, long shuttered, had become the disposal point. He slipped deeper into the shadows, tracking their voices as they walked toward a rear stairwell. "We should have killed him the night of the disappearance," Lionel whispered harshly. "Too risky," Colby said. "Elizabeth insisted he vanish quietly. A widow's tragedy, not a scandal. She still wants the sympathy votes." So, that was the end game, not just money. Elizabeth Greaves wanted her husband's fortune and her public image intact. A grieving woman who rose above loss to become a patron saint of charity. And behind it all, Beckworth and Colby would siphon everything of value and vanish again. A floorboard creaked beneath Pinkerton's heel. Both men turned. "What was that?" Beckworth whispered. Colby pulled a revolver from his coat. "Someone's here." Pinkerton crouched low and slipped into a machine alcove. The iron frames blocked the lantern's reach. He slowed his breathing and waited. Footsteps approached. Beckworth's voice shook. "Do you think it's one of Greaves's guards?" "No," Colby said. "This feels different." He wasn't wrong. Pinkerton waited until they were near, then rose from the shadows like a ghost, revolver aimed. "Gentlemen," he said calmly, "don't move." Colby spun and fired. The shot tore into a steel pillar, inches from Pinkerton's head. He fired back, grazing Colby's shoulder and sending the man sprawling. Beckworth ran. Pinkerton let him. Colby moaned and clutched his bleeding arm. You don't understand." "I understand plenty," Pinkerton said, stepping forward and kicking Colby's weapon aside. "You and Beckworth planned this for months. You forged the signatures, created the ledger trail, and used Horace's own driver to abduct him." "You can't prove any of it." Pinkerton reached into his coat and tossed down the forged documents, the cargo manifests and the ledger entries, all stamped and catalogued. "That's a start," sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Police, summoned by a signal flare Pinkerton had set off from the roof earlier. Colby slumped against a rusted machine. "It wasn't supposed to end like this." "No," Pinkerton said. "It was supposed to end with a funeral for a man who wasn't dead." 10 minutes later, Chicago police flooded the mill. Colby was cuffed and dragged away. Pinkerton gave them Beckworth's likely location, an old hunting cabin on the edge of Lake Michigan, where Lionel had once registered a summer lease under his wife's maiden name. A squad was dispatched immediately. Pinkerton, meanwhile, made his way to Hobbs's warehouse. There, amid the scent of cold meat and mildew, he found Horace Greaves. He was shackled to a pipe, half-conscious, his coat torn and crusted with laudanum residue. Pinkerton crouched beside him and said gently, "Mr. Greaves, you're safe now." Horace's eyes fluttered open. Recognition came slowly. "You're the detective?" "That's right." "I had dreams," Horace mumbled. "Elizabeth, laughing, Lionel with her, talking about inheritance." "They were real," Pinkerton said softly, "but they'll never harm you again." He helped Greaves into a coat, and out into the breaking dawn. As they stepped into the street, the sunlight cracked through the factory skyline like judgment from on high. The truth was free now. The lies had nowhere left to hide. Chapter 6. The Train That Never Stopped. The trial of Lionel Beckworth and R.J. Colby was still weeks away, but for Allan Pinkerton the case was far from over. Horace Greaves had been rescued, yes, drugged, disoriented and weak, but alive. Still, Pinkerton couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Something deeper than fraud. Something colder than a simple thirst for money. Back in his office on Madison Street, Pinkerton studied the map of the Des Moines freight line. He circled the places where Greaves was moved: Bay 4 at South Shore, the Iowa City Detour, and Hobbs's warehouse. There had been one more delivery stop listed on the shipping manifest, an unregistered mill station west of Davenport. The line marked it as Grove 11. No known depot or crew, just an anonymous service name. That was unusual. Pinkerton paid a visit to the rail company's central office. The dispatcher on duty, a wiry man named Floyd, met his questions with a twitchy gaze. Grove 11? Floyd said. That's not on any route anymore. But it was, Pinkerton said. Only for special hauls. It's an emergency sidetrack. Nobody uses it. Pinkerton leaned forward. Then why does it appear on a shipment linked to a kidnapping and fraud worth $500,000? Floyd blinked, then shuffled over to a cabinet. He returned with a yellowed binder. Used once, he said, flipping through the records. 2 weeks ago, special cargo transfer, night job. Pinkerton tapped the page. Who was the crew? No crew listed. Who authorized it? Floyd hesitated. No signature, just the initials E.G. Elizabeth Greaves. Pinkerton's fingers curled against the paper. Colby and Beckworth hadn't been the ringleaders after all. Elizabeth had arranged the sidetrack. She had authorized the off-record use of an industrial freight lane. And she had known her husband's location long after he disappeared. The widow had outplayed them all. Pinkerton went straight to the Greaves estate. The iron gate was closed, the windows dark. A maid told him Elizabeth was away. No destination given, no return planned. He checked with the telegraph office next. Nothing. Then the banks. At the First Union Trust, the manager handed Pinkerton a receipt under duress. Elizabeth Greaves had withdrawn $60,000 in bonds the day after Lionel's arrest. She said it was for charitable relocation, the manager muttered. Pinkerton felt his pulse climb. Elizabeth was fleeing, not just the city, but the country. He raced to the harbour. In the freezing wind, he interrogated dockhands, porters, and customs officers. Finally, he found her name on the passenger log of a steamer bound for Montreal. The SS Concordia, departure, midnight, tonight. Pinkerton didn't wait for backup. He galloped to the wharf, the Concordia already steaming in the dark. Dock lanterns glowed like watchful eyes. Crewmen shouted final orders. He scanned the deck. There, Elizabeth Greaves, in a grey travel cloak and veiled hat, walking arm in arm with a man he didn't recognize. Pinkerton strode up the gangway, his badge flashing in the lantern light. "Elizabeth Greaves," he called, "you are not leaving tonight." She turned slowly, her face composed, even amused. "Mr. Pinkerton, so dramatic. I have evidence you orchestrated your husband's disappearance." "I encouraged his retreat," she replied. "For his health. I had no idea Lionel and his friends would take it so far." "Stop lying." Her eyes glittered. "You have no warrant." "I have a statement from Horace himself. He's awake now. He remembers your voice, your orders, your hand on the pen authorizing the Grove 11 stop." The man beside her reached for something inside his coat. Pinkerton drew faster. "Don't!" The stranger froze. A revolver peeked from under his lapel. Elizabeth's calm cracked. "You won't get away with this," she said softly. "I already have," Pinkerton replied. "You were smart enough to fool your lawyers, your household staff, maybe even your own brother. But you overlooked one thing." "What's that?" He smiled grimly. "Horace Greaves loved his money more than he hated you, and he wasn't ready to die just yet." 2 harbour officers arrived, summoned by Pinkerton's signal. Elizabeth didn't resist. As they took her arm, she straightened, proud to the end. "You think this is justice?" she hissed. "I think this is closure." Back in his office the next day, Pinkerton sat with Horace Greaves. The man was thinner now, paler, but the steel in his voice had returned.
"I let too many people get too close," Horace muttered. "Including my own wife?" "You were nearly erased from your own empire," Pinkerton said. Horace gave a thin smile. "And you dragged me back?" Pinkerton rose and extended a hand. "Just doing my job." But as he left the office, he couldn't help but wonder. If Elizabeth had boarded that ship 1 hour earlier, if Horace had remained unconscious 1 day longer, it would have been the perfect crime. But the train that never stopped had carried one lie too far, and Allan Pinkerton had ridden it all the way to the truth.
Chapter 7. A Coffin of Lies. The courtroom was packed. A sea of waistcoats, veils, and open notebooks filled the benches. Reporters leaned forward, their pencils scratching. Spectators strained for a glimpse of the woman at the center of the storm. Elizabeth Greaves, widow no more, dressed in somber black, hands folded like a statue, carved by intent. Horace Greaves sat across the aisle, flanked by attorneys. Pale but upright, he was the ghost who'd come back to ruin a perfect funeral. Allan Pinkerton leaned against a marble pillar near the back. He'd testified for 2 full days. The forged ledgers, the shipping manifests, the monogrammed cloth, the secret sidetrack, the desperate attempt to leave the country. It was all laid bare, but the defense had shifted tactics. She was manipulated, the attorney claimed. Her brother and Colby orchestrated the scheme. She feared for her safety. She was lied to like everyone else. And she played the role well. Even now, her face held sorrow, not scheming. She nodded occasionally, wiped a tear when Horace spoke of being drugged, yet her eyes never betrayed alarm. Pinkerton didn't buy it for a second. During a recess, he stood outside, watching the wind whip ash across the courthouse steps. Beside him, the lead prosecutor joined with a cigarette and a sigh. "She's going to walk, isn't she?" the man muttered. Pinkerton didn't answer immediately. Then, "Not if I can help it." "Even if we convict Colby and Beckworth, she'll play the victim." She was the architect. "We need one more nail," the prosecutor said, looking over. "One they can't pry loose." Pinkerton returned to the Greaves estate that night. He walked alone through its halls. Horace had left it empty, vowing never to return. The staff had long since been dismissed. In the study, he stood before Elizabeth's writing desk. The same silver inkwell, the same scented parchment. He pulled open drawer after drawer, letters, notes, opera invitations, until finally, something different. A locked compartment, thin and hidden behind a false drawer bottom. He picked it. Inside was a slim folio marked private, e.g. only. He opened it carefully, letters, dozens of them, from Elizabeth to Colby. Their contents were not shy. Horace deserves silence, permanent silence. Lionel hesitates. He needs reminding. No risk, no inheritance. After Hobbs, there can be no more mistakes. Drug Horace and move him. We'll make sure the world forgets he ever existed. It was all there. The entire conspiracy in her own hand, coded with implication, but no longer deniable. Pinkerton brought them to the prosecutor the next morning. That afternoon in court, the letters were introduced as evidence. The judge allowed it, barely. Elizabeth's expression never faltered as each one was read aloud, but for the first time, she didn't look up. And when the final page was passed around, Pinkerton saw it, the briefest flicker. Not panic, not regret, contempt. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They returned with 3 verdicts: Lionel Beckworth, guilty on all counts; R.J. Colby, guilty on all counts; Elizabeth Greaves, guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted unlawful detainment, and attempted murder. Sentencing would follow. But justice, Pinkerton thought, had finally moved. The day after the verdict, Horace Greaves invited Pinkerton to lunch in a quiet corner of the Chicago Club. He'd shaved, regained weight, and spoke with a familiar iron confidence. "You saved my life," Horace said. "I followed a trail," Pinkerton replied. "You were just smart enough to leave one." Horace chuckled, then sobered. "You think she ever loved me?" Pinkerton sipped his coffee. "I think she loved your empire. You were just the key to the gate." "She could have had everything," Horace muttered. "If she'd waited, if she'd been patient." "No," Pinkerton said. "She never wanted to inherit. She wanted to erase you. The fortune was only valuable if you were dead." Horace said nothing. The silence spoke for him. Later, Pinkerton stood in his office again, sorting papers into neat stacks. A courier arrived with a package, no return address. Inside was a small, elegant coffin, miniature. A doll-sized replica of a funeral box carved from ebony. No note, no explanation, just a small brass plaque on the lid. "You were almost too late." Pinkerton stared at it for a long time. Then he closed the box and locked it away. Not every victory was clean. Some left splinters that refused to dislodge. Chapter 8. Pinkerton's Final Play. Snow was falling again when Allan Pinkerton stood before the iron gates of Joliet Prison. The flakes drifted like ash over the grey stone facade, settling onto the shoulders of guards, melting into their collars. Inside, 3 of Chicago's most talked-about prisoners were locked behind steel and concrete. But only one truly haunted him: Elizabeth Greaves. A warden escorted Pinkerton through 2 layers of checkpoints. The hall echoed with the clink of keys and the distant mutter of inmates. When they reached the visitation cell, the room was empty, save for the woman seated at the table, her hands folded, her posture erect. She was thinner, her hair tied back severely. No black lace, no perfume, just a long grey shift, standard issue. Still, she looked entirely in control. "You came?" she said. "I had a feeling." "I needed to see the end of this," Pinkerton replied. Elizabeth tilted her head slightly. "Endings are illusions, Mr. Pinkerton. You should know that by now." He didn't sit. "I'm not here to play games. I want to know one thing. Was there ever a moment where you doubted it?" The plan, the deception, hurting Horace. She smiled, cool and untouched. "He was already dying, he just didn't know it. If we hadn't taken action, someone else would have. I merely accelerated the inevitable. You drugged him, tied him like a slab of meat, forged away his fortune." "And yet you still admire me a little, don't you?" she interrupted softly. "You admire what it took to do it, what I was willing to risk. Men like you, hunters, you understand women like me more than you admit." Pinkerton leaned forward slightly. "I understand predators. You almost won because you convinced yourself you were the victim. But I don't admire you, Mrs. Greaves. I anticipated you." Her expression hardened for the first time. "Then why come at all?" "To give you a message," he said. "From Horace." That caught her off guard. She blinked once. "He sent a message?" "He wants you to know something," Pinkerton said, pulling a folded note from his coat pocket. "He wrote this himself." She hesitated. then extended a hand. He placed the paper in her palm. She opened it. "Thank you for showing me the value of solitude. You helped me learn that legacy matters more than loyalty. Goodbye forever." Her fingers clenched the paper until the edges tore. Then she calmly set it down. "He still doesn't understand what we built," she whispered. "You didn't build anything," Pinkerton said. "You tore everything down and expected to rise from the rubble, but you don't rise from ash when there's no fire left in the world to warm you." She chuckled dryly. "Poetic." He turned to leave. "You'll see me again?" she called behind him. He paused at the door. "No," he said. "I don't think I will." Outside the prison, the wind had changed direction. The snow lightened as the sun cracked briefly through the clouds. Pinkerton pulled his coat tighter and walked toward the carriage waiting near the outer wall. Inside sat Horace Greaves. "You went through with it?" Horace said, not looking up from his gloves. "She read your message," Pinkerton said. Horace nodded. "You think she believed it?" "I think she believes she still has power, but she's in a place now where illusions can't breathe." Horace looked out the window. "I'll leave the city, the company will continue, but my name, I don't care to see it in headlines again." "You'll recover," Pinkerton said. "Maybe," Horace replied. "But trust, once that breaks, it never fits back the same." Back in his office later that night, Pinkerton opened his case journal. The entry was already half written. Case 1173, the Greaves disappearance. Subject, Horace Greaves, presumed dead. Real condition, abduction by familial conspiracy for financial gain. Perpetrators, Lionel Beckworth, brother-in-law, R.J. Colby, associate forger, Elizabeth Greaves, wife. Status, all apprehended and convicted. Subject recovered alive. Motive, inheritance, power, reputation. He closed the ledger. Then he took out the miniature coffin, the one Elizabeth had sent, meant to taunt him. He opened it one last time. Inside, where once there had only been black felt, was now a small calling card. "Next time, it'll be you who disappears." He stared at it, then burned it in the hearth without a word. As the paper curled and vanished, Pinkerton poured himself a glass of bourbon, sat in silence, and listened to the city hum beneath the weight of fresh snow. Justice was rarely clean. But tonight, at least, it had been certain.